Now, as was mentioned there, the Home Office is facing criticism, not just from our viewers, but elsewhere too, for refusing to disclose the cost of furnishing flats for asylum seekers. They've cited concerns around the sensitivity surrounding the issue. The Information Commissioner ruled in favour of keeping these costs secret, arguing that revealing them could put asylum seekers at risk of protests and harms. Critics, including our very own Reform UK MP Lee Anderson, argue that taxpayers have a right to know how their money is spent. So that's the question. Don't we have a right to know how our money is being spent? Well, let's see what my panel make of this one. GB News contributor and political Benjamin Butterworth and political commentator Suzanne Evans. Benjamin, I'll start with you. Apparently these flats market rate could be about $1,400 a month. There'll be many British people watching this programme thinking, oh, I wouldn't mind a cushy flat, £1,400 a month, furnished out by the taxpayer. Oh, that sounds lovely. Get me in there. But they can't, can they? It's for people that have arrived here illegally, who come, get bed, board, benefits and luxury tidings. Not bad.
Well, I don't think they get luxury. It's something like £40.
Have you seen those flats?
Something like £40 a week, I think, is the allowance that a refugee has. So
£40 a week, and you're staying in accommodation like that, and some of them could be working in a legal trade as well.
Well, I think, personally, that they should be allowed to work so that they can pay for some of these things themselves, and that we should have ID cards.
How many more people would come then?
So that you can only have people working that we've permitted to work, whereas right now you have this ludicrous situation where they get a flat which sounds nice enough like this, and then they go to work, you know, in a car wash with no papers, no documents, and are paid cash in hand, and so they're taking up the space of a job that we've said they can't have, but they're not paying tax on it, and taxpayers are paying for the flat. I think that's a ridiculous way around it. But the question of whether we should know... I mean, look, I'm a journalist, so it'd be remiss to say that we shouldn't know this information. It strikes me as peculiar that they're not allowing this information to be known. You know, the question is, you know, did it cost more than it should have? Was it more generous than most of us would think is appropriate? But at the same time, we have just had people locked up for firebombing hotels where refugees were staying. And so maybe there is a legitimate concern in this area that it would draw attention to these flats and that they would be the target of vandalism, of attacks, of xenophobia. And is that a useful outcome? Well, no, it's not.
So some people, Suzanne, may be of the view that Benjamin has a point there and that there's an issue of safety and security of people. But equally, is this just going to be used now to censor every piece of debate and speech around this issue in order to clamp down on dissenting voices?
This is my worry. This sets a very dangerous precedent. What else could the state potentially try to hide for us, supposedly on the grounds of an individual or a group of people's security? So, for example, could we decide at a point in the future that MP salaries are not going to be released into the public domain because they've gone up so high that people feel affronted by it and don't want to pay for it, and an MP's security might be further threatened? Very, very dangerous precedent indeed, this. You know, this money that is being spent is yours and my money. It is taxpayers' money. The government has an absolute duty to inform us how it spends it. That is only fair. And any government that doesn't, I'm afraid, has really gone rogue. It's a breach of trust with the British people, because we'll be paying, you know, their housing costs, their heating costs, their electricity costs, when we might be very well struggling to pay those ourselves. Indeed. In the current climate. We'll be paying for their clothing, their food and other living expenses, again, when some of us might be very much struggling. It is a serious breach of trust, this. It's completely unacceptable. And I don't think the safety arguments wash, really, because as I say, you could say safety was going to be compromised in just about every case you could think of.
GB News' Tom Harwood, Benjamin, yesterday was speaking to the government minister, Dan Jarvis, and Mr Jarvis, refused to actually say where the new arrivals who will be receiving what some call de facto amnesty to remain in Britain, with 90%, as I say, of applications being accepted. He refused to say whether or not they would be placed in social housing. So, of course, right now there is, as you well know, and I don't doubt for a second you're not honest in your campaign to build more houses. But that social housing, Benjamin, is going to be swallowed up by illegal migrants. So you can see, surely, the anger from people like Suzanne and our viewers who are saying this is just a total joke.
I mean, the waiting lists for social housing are extremely long, and you get lots of legitimate cases where people can't get a council house. You have lots of situations where someone has had more children and they have a completely inappropriate sized house. So that's definitely a problem. You know, the truth is that when you arrive, you have rights to very few things. Certainly, as a legal migrant, you get nothing, and that's the right idea because you're here to do a job that you've chosen. So I do think we need to build more houses. I think the question is, though, you know, look at what the last government was doing. They were putting £300 million on paper in the budget to deal with this, and then we're getting several billion pounds as a top-up from the Treasury to cover the real costs. I think it was thought to be something like £7 billion that was actually allocated for this. And so they've been grotesquely dishonest about how much it's costing. It's not going to be fixed overnight.
Suzanne, where are you at on that then? That question of, well, actually, the unfairness.
Oh, it's totally unfair. And I think anybody, you know, that's on a social housing waiting list is going to see it's grotesquely unfair. And this all comes back to what we were saying earlier, really, in our earlier debate. You know, if we knew that everyone housed in an asylum hotel was a genuine asylum seeker who hadn't come here having chucked their papers overboard, who hadn't tried to game the system, then I think the British public would be very sympathetic, because I've never met anybody that doesn't want to give a genuine refugee somewhere to live and safe harbour in a safe country. It's the way in which the system is being exploited that makes people very, very angry.
To be honest with you,
particularly those
Suzanne,
people who are missing out.
I'm at the stage now where I think close the borders, because I think the asylum and migration system is a total mess.
Well, it's not working.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it should be working, because if we did shut the borders and we did stop our asylum programme, then genuine people would die. There's absolutely no doubt about that. The system's got to be reformed. We've got to stop it being exploited and abused.
Well, joining me now is the businessman and former Brexit Party MEP, Ben Habib. Ben, thank you very much for your company. Always a pleasure. Where are you at on that question? A lot of our viewers are saying, hang on a minute. We need to be able to scrutinise this to see just how much this is costing the taxpayer.
Yeah, so you were talking earlier, Darren. I've been listening for a while, and I have to say it's quite depressing listening to some of the stuff you've been discussing, because your heart just sinks, your stomach sinks with a sort of resignation to our government's inability to stand up for what's right for this country, and this refusal to hand over perfectly legitimate information to the British taxpayer about how their money is being spent is yet another example of how our government stands in opposition to us. It's not just about the info, by the way. We know that the info is going to be embarrassing for the government, because otherwise they would have released it. We know it's going to reveal that lots of money has been spent on fitting out flats for illegal migrants who've come to this country. We know that already. And their refusal to disclose it just confirms it.
Yeah, and Ben, I wonder then as well, because we had with Tom Roberts, the aspiring Royal Marine, who was murdered, and there's going to be no inquiry into his death and the failures of the state as far as asylum and migration is concerned, with someone who pretended to be an Afghan child. Now, can you see why our viewers are getting really frustrated and saying this sounds far more than like cover-up than it does conspiracy?
Yeah, well, as I said, you know, both my heart and my stomach sink every time I hear how our government is governing us, how it promotes the interests of people who've entered this country illegally, over and above and to the detriment of the British people, to the point where it's so embarrassed about the information on money it's spending on people who have no right to be in this country, that it appeals to the Information Commissioner to quash freedom of information. We already have the quashing of freedom of speech coming through the various social media channels. Now they're just not going to tell us what they're doing with our money, because they know that we're going to be furious about it. And I mean, the whole thing is just infuriating. And you saw Keir Starmer trying to reset the relationship with the head of the Republic of Ireland. Well, what reset? What further concession can we make to the Republic of Ireland? We've handed over Northern Ireland because they insisted there'd be a resumption of violence by the IRA if we didn't do so. A threat of terrorism from the Republic of Ireland, under Leo Varadkar, we hand over Northern Ireland. People coming to the shores illegally have no right to be here, put ahead of the queue for homeless people in the United Kingdom, homeless veterans in the United Kingdom, people who have been waiting for ages to get into social housing. So these illegal migrants are given 4-star hotels, fitted out at vast costs into flats. When I was standing in Wellingborough, you may recall, Darren, I don't know if you saw the story, that there was an elderly couple who received a letter, they brought it to my attention, saying the council was going to repossess their home so they could settle migrants who've come to this country, largely single young men from North Africa. I mean, you just can't make this up. And this is a British government standing, in my view, in opposition to the interests of this nation and to the interests of the people of this nation. And that's why I've been saying for a while now that Keir Starmer is anti-British. And you see that in every step he takes. That information is legitimately our information. It should be in the public domain. If they're embarrassed about it, it makes it doubly important that it's in the public domain. We need to know what they're doing.
Yeah, well, Ben, I couldn't agree, and I'm sure many of our viewers think that you're in agreement like a nest of singing birds. But Ben Habib, thank you very much, as ever.